Hi, welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Shannon Eliot. Today I'm joined by a military veteran and clinician to discuss mental health among those who have served. Aaron Hinde grew up in Antioch and joined the U.S. Army shortly after graduating high school in 2000. He was deployed to Iraq in 2003 with the 101st Airborne Division. While serving, Aaron was tasked with network systems maintenance, rear gunner, and guard tower duties. Upon returning to California, Aaron went back to school and became a new dad, all while trying to understand his mental health challenges and learn about the root causes of PTSD. Dr. David Joseph is a clinical psychologist currently serving as the acting team leader of the Oakland Vet Center. He provides treatment for veterans with readjustment stress, as well as combat and military sexual trauma. Dr. Joseph has developed trainings for police officers, first responders, and providers on effective interventions for veterans with PTSD. He also appears in The Pain Behind the Badge, a documentary about police officers and suicide. Welcome, Aaron, and welcome, Dr. Joseph. Thank you for joining me today. Aaron, could you start us off by telling us your story?
Sure. Well, I joined the Army right after high school. Pretty much a friend talked me into it. I was looking at going to a local community college and working at a job. And I didn't really have a whole lot going for me, so I decided to go for it. I said, I might as well build some character and get some money for college. This was back in the summer of 2000. Then I got through basic, and it wasn't quite what I expected, but for the most part, it wasn't too bad. And then 9/11 happened, and everything changed. I saw overnight total security consciousness fall upon the military, where we started having checkpoints in our own barracks and concertina wire on the streets. It was very interesting because it was in the middle of the United States, like we were expecting a foreign invasion any minute. And then from there, we waited around for a little bit, and finally I was deployed in 2003 to Iraq. Everybody's deployment was different. I actually went over by ship, and I stayed over there for a year. I traveled all throughout the country, providing various communications-related duties, either handing out data or phone lines or acting as a relay signal, and also providing rear gunner duties while doing convoys and other various details. It was a very interesting and eye-opening experience for me. It was the first time I had ever been deployed, and so it was definitely a life-changing experience. There were some close calls. There was definitely a lot of learning, both about myself and about how America handles its foreign relations. I remember one of the things that made a quick impression upon me about going over was seeing all these people and my interactions with the foreign nationals there. And not only that, also seeing companies like Kellogg Brown and Root and Halliburton and other various corporations providing services for the armed forces, whereas before the armed forces provided those services. So that was another layer that was took a while for me to mull over and figure out for myself.
And I know you mentioned you had a couple of close calls, even though you weren't necessarily deployed as combat. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. Well, my primary job was communications, but everybody in the military does a couple of different jobs. My personal weapon was a M249, a squad automatic weapon. And pretty much since I was in a communications battalion, that was a pretty heavy weapon. And we did daily convoys out to our satellite communication nodes so that we could drop off water, mail, food, and whatnot. So I was always put into the rear bed. I did that duty for about a month. And I was, about 21 years old. It sucked for the most part. It was hot. It was dusty. We weren't getting into a whole lot of firefights because there wasn't a big insurgency yet. And so the details sucked. So I did that for about a month, and then I got called away to provide communications to some assault teams out at Al-Assad Air Force Base. While I was gone for a week, the convoy had actually been attacked. Someone had shot a rocket-propelled grenade into the bed of the last vehicle, which is where I was sitting providing rear gunner duties. So I had to come back and I had to do that detail again for an additional 2 months. So it was real eye-opening experience before being called away and afterwards. The level of tenseness for out the entire ride was completely off the charts than what it was before. I was expecting, something to be coming around every single corner.
Yeah, that must have been really tough psychologically.
For sure, it was definitely an eye-opening experience for me personally. Everybody knows that that's a kind of reality, but until it starts happening to you personally, that's when you start getting those wake-up calls.
Right. Dr. Joseph, how common are mental health challenges in veterans?
Well, what I can talk about is veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And what we know about that is, and these numbers are really, I think we shouldn't take them too literally and think of them more as kind of general guidelines. But we think about 70% of returning veterans from Iraq or Afghanistan typically don't have mental health problems, mental health challenges that they have to deal with. And then we think about 20%, anywhere between 10 to 20% of veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan will report or be diagnosed with PTSD or depression. And then about another 20% will report or be diagnosed with some form of a traumatic brain injury. And of course, those traumatic brain injury and PTSD and depression will often overlap. So you could have all three of those, you could have two of those. And that's why the numbers are more than 100%.
Right. Aaron, what education does the military give around mental health? What did you experience when you were there?
I didn't really receive a whole lot of mental health education. It had been a little bit of a while since we had been at a large-scale combat operations like we started in Iraq and Afghanistan. So when I got out in 2004, I wasn't really debriefed a whole lot. I'm sure that there were a couple of classes that I attended, but nothing really sticks in my memory. And when I was ETSing, I certainly didn't get debriefed a whole lot about mental health illnesses, if at all, if I can recall. ETSing is when you're leaving the military service for good. You spend, about a good 30 days crossing off all of your T's, dotting all of your I's, and the Army is making sure that you're good to go. But and there is a doctor's visit that is entailed with that, but that's mostly for physical reasons. You got any permanent injuries that we need to know about? Is your arm broken? Does it still hurt? But no one really asked about my state of mind.
When did you realize, or at what point did you realize that you might be struggling with something like a mental health issue?
Well, it was always second-guessing myself, right when I came back, I was having problems sleeping, and I was and depressed, and I didn't really know what was happening. I didn't think I had PTSD because I was combat operations. So I went to sick call one morning just because I wasn't feeling right, and I just wanted to know what was happening. I talked to some specialist for about 5 minutes, and then a doctor came in. I forget his rank. He talked to me for about a minute. Then I left with a prescription, and that was pretty much it. I think it was for like Xanax or something like that. I took it for about a week, and then I decided that wasn't for me, and I threw it away, and I figured I'll just tough this out on my own. And that's what I, tried to do for a while.
So, Dr. Joseph, many people think of PTSD as something occurring really only from large-scale combat or something necessarily violent. How common is it for PTSD to maybe occur in an everyday activity such as a training or another military activity?
Again, it's hard to speak to exactly what the numbers are. Unfortunately, the thing about PTSD is that there are lots of ways that you can get PTSD. And because PTSD is really not about combat or any other particular trauma. It's about the experience of feeling really fearful, of feeling helpless, horrified, out of control, some combination of all of those things. And unfortunately, there are all sorts of ways that in the military and in the civilian world we can experience something like that. So of course in the military with instances of combat, that makes it more likely, but there are so many other ways in the military and in training that you can have experience of trauma, whether it's an industrial accident or a car accident, interpersonal trauma. There are assaults that happen, of course, in the military, that a service member could also get PTSD from that.
And tell me a little bit about the military sexual trauma.
Well, military sexual trauma is something that we're finally really starting to pay more attention to. Well-deserved attention.
Yeah.
So military sexual trauma is just like sexual trauma in any other situation. We're talking about sexual assault or rape, unwanted touching, those kinds of things. And what we know about sexual trauma in the military is that not only does it carry all of the same weight as sexual trauma in any other situation, but there are certain things about being in the military that can make sexual trauma more complicated and more difficult to deal with. And that includes things like the hierarchy of the military. Who are you going to tell if you're sexually assaulted? Who are you going to tell if the person who sexually assaulted you is a superior? Are you going to go over their heads and break chain of command? What happens if you're not believed, which is often the case? Then will confidentiality be respected? If you're in a war zone and you've been sexually traumatized, where are you going to go? Do you have to leave your unit? Will the person that you accused of sexually assaulting you have to leave the unit? What if that person is extremely popular, saved,
Overwhelming someone, very quickly, yeah.
Yeah, from a burning Humvee the day before. Some really, really complicated aspects of kind of the closed system that is the military make military sexual trauma really, really pernicious for people and very hard to deal with.
And I'd just like to jump on some of that. Not only is it a closed system, but it actively works against that. What commander wants to admit on paper that his soldier has sexually assaulted another one of his soldiers? So it's actively sought against and tried to squash on a command level basis. And not only that, I mean, military sexual trauma is the same as sexual trauma, but the fact is that it is much more traumatic, especially if you are deployed, because you're in a very stressful situation, and the people who are committing these grievous crimes against you are supposed to be your battle buddies. I remember reading accounts of soldiers. This woman's first day in deployment, her platoon sergeant comes up to her and says, "You're my new girlfriend, because if you don't, I'm sending you out on convoy every day." And that's where the vast majority of the casualties were coming from, were from convoy casualties going over IEDs and stuff like that. So it is much more intense than normal sexual assault because it can last more than a day, and it's from someone who is supposed to protect you. You know?
Right.
Yeah, I think Aaron makes a good point that it often involves a really profound betrayal. That the people who are not only your battle buddies, but essentially your family, would be perpetrating a crime against you, and in some cases also trying to cover that up. So in addition to the actual stress of the event is often the trauma of what happens after that.
So Aaron, you touched on this a little bit previously, but I'm really curious, what kind of treatment have you experienced?
I have tried prescription medicine, both synthetic medicines as well as holistics. I think medical marijuana has helped me somewhat. Talk therapy, and not only that, but community has really helped. I know when I got back, when I got out of the military service, I tried to reintegrate with my old high school friends, with my old community. It was really hard, and actually after a couple years, I eventually shed a lot of my former friends. And I found a community with other veterans and people who kind of, got me and understood where I was coming from. So finding community was really good therapy for me and really instrumental in me becoming a much more stable person and being able to function on a much higher level than what I was before.
Was it difficult for you to find other veterans who were willing to open up and share what they were experiencing?
I mean, everybody's journey is their own. I think everybody's recovery is their own. So, yeah, on the whole, it was. I remember when I was going to DVC, I was much more likely to find a veteran at the opposite end of the spectrum where I was, a very patriotic veteran who was really proud of his service and really gung-ho about the wars that were going on, whereas at the same time I was feeling very personally responsible and guilty for what was happening. And so I couldn't really identify with that at all or find community at all.
Sure. So what have you found to help your wellness on a daily and ongoing basis?
Well, like I said, I eventually found other people who felt that maybe these wars weren't the best things for Iraq and Afghanistan. I was able to build community through organizations like Veterans for Peace, or Iraq Veterans Against the War, Swords to Plowshares, or just other autonomous veterans or community members who sort of felt how I did. And being able to make those connections was really important, and also finding people from those countries and making connections with them and having interpersonal relations with them was really helpful in me trying to understand the context of my experiences and help me work through it.
And I know you have a little one.
Yes.
How important is he?
He's really important. Honestly, having a son is probably what saved me more than anything else, realizing that I no longer only have a responsibility to myself, but to someone else as well. And having a child was really important in understanding something that I think is really key, understanding empathy and trying to incorporate that into my daily life. It was really important for me to connect with the world again in that respect.
Dr. Joseph, what kinds of treatment are generally given for PTSD, trauma, or other mental health issues for veterans?
Well, so typically there's kind of a combination of talk therapy and medication therapy that's offered. Talk therapy can involve a whole host of different kinds of things. One of the therapies, there are a number of therapies that we call evidence-based therapies. They're manualized treatments that have generally shown to be really effective with PTSD. And certainly those can be really effective. And then in addition, things like couples therapy, family therapy, group therapy. Aaron talked a little bit about building community. We find at the Vet Center that our therapy groups are often more powerful or equally powerful to our individual sessions because of the community that it builds. That the social support that veterans get from being with each other as opposed to, let's say, being with a clinician, even a good clinician, often is significantly more profound and more powerful than even the individual work that we do. So some combination of those things, individually tailored. I agree again what Aaron was saying, that everyone's recovery is an individual process that they go through. So at the Vet Center, we try to really individually tailor the way that we provide services to people and kind of meet them where they're at. There's some people that what they really need and what they really want is social interaction. And they're not interested in, or it's not the best time for them to be doing really hardcore individual therapy where they review their traumatic events over and over again. And there are other people who are really ready for that and really need that, and we try to offer that to them as well.
And I'm interested that you mentioned family therapy.
Yeah.
How hard is it on spouses, children of returning veterans who might be struggling with PTSD?
I think in general it's stressful for everyone. In addition to PTSD, and oftentimes these things kind of get conflated together, but in addition to PTSD is something that I would say the vast, vast majority of veterans go through when they return from a combat zone, which is just intense readjustment stress.
Sure.
And the process of coming home and readjusting to a family that has changed while you're gone, you changed while you're gone, and then having to contend with something like post-traumatic stress disorder just adds a tremendous amount of stress into the family. What we find is that to the degree that couples can communicate with each other, can emotionally share and support each other, they do better. Unfortunately, we also find that a lot of veterans, for a variety of different reasons, have trouble sharing the kinds of things that are on their mind and feel like no one will understand them, and no one will, particularly the people in their family, that no one will really understand or relate to what may have been the most important experiences of their lives. And so oftentimes those things are kept quiet or they're minimized. And it's not uncommon, for example, I'll give an example. I was talking to a veteran where his wife said to him, and this was a Vietnam veteran, so it had been 40 years, and she said to him, well, how often do you really think about the war? And even that, just having that part of the conversation was a new thing for them. And he looked at her and he said, there's never a time that I'm not thinking about the war.
I call that the superimposed life. You spend every day looking at society and you're thinking about what's happening over there right now. Every day you wonder how many people died over there, and that is part of the stressors of trying to reintegrate back into society. It's a complete cultural shift, and not only that, it's a contextual shift as well. Whereas you're living in a culture that is solely focused on these wars and occupations that the military is happening, to a society that isn't so focused on it, where it's a lot more abstract.
And I feel that puts in a lot of tension and pressure into the readjustment that's not normally there as well. And I would say that that can also maybe be an underlying cause of a much more vague anxiety and emotional turmoil if someone doesn't have PTSD.
Yeah, it sounds like part of you is still over there in some ways.
Yeah, and I think it bears saying that today, or over the last 10 years, these wars have been fought by a little over 2 million people, which means that they have been fought largely over and over again by the same people. So more than 800,000 veterans have deployed more than once. And what we see is that the percentage of folks serving in the military today is about 1/2 of 1% of the population. So here in Oakland, we talk a lot about the 1% and the 99%. But really the 1% or the 1/2 of 1% that we talk about at the Vet Center are our veterans. And so again, if your experience in wartime is different from 99.5% of the population, it is going to be difficult to talk to people who can relate to your experience. It is going to be hard to find someone whose thinking mirrors your thinking because their life experiences will be vastly different from yours.
It's lonely.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of veterans it's an extremely lonely experience, regardless of depression, regardless of PTSD. And then when you start adding on those kinds of things that can make your life a little bit smaller and make your life more challenging and harder, a lot of veterans find themselves kind of retreating from the people in their lives who might be available to offer that kind of support. But the gap between what the one experienced and the other experienced, or what the one understands and the other can relate to, can sometimes feel like it's too hard to bridge.
So what might some common triggers and responses to triggers be for a veteran struggling with PTSD or other trauma?
So the most common triggers for PTSD include things like memories or associations with particular traumatic events. So it could be the smell of fuel, the sound of a helicopter. Fireworks on the 4th of July, for example, are often very difficult for our veterans with PTSD because the sound of fireworks sounds very similar to the sounds of explosions or mortars. But then some triggers are more subtle than that and much more mundane than that. It could be the experience of standing in line at the grocery store and having someone stand just a little bit too close to you, or reach around you to get People magazine to find out what Justin Bieber did this week. It could be the sound of a crying baby, the sound of your own crying baby. It could be your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend talking to you in a pressurized way where you feel like you're being attacked. It could be being stuck in the Caldecott Tunnel during rush hour, or driving behind a gas tanker. I had one veteran say to me, he said, when I drive behind a gas tanker, he said, you see a gas tanker, but I see a bomb that hasn't exploded yet.
So Aaron, what are your triggers and how do you deal with them?
Well, I mean, definitely there are specific things like explosions and things like that, fireworks. Recently when we had Fleet Week, the Blue Angels definitely caused me to feel really uncomfortable. And then there's other things that really aren't quite so specific. Sometimes you get vague feelings or impressions. I really became somewhat agoraphobic when I first came back. I used to be big into going into concerts and stuff like that, and I just can't be around that capacity of people anymore. I can't be shoulder to shoulder with people anymore. I can't stand loud music or loud noises. If I'm in a place with a lot of people with a lot of different voices coming at me, I need to get away, go to a corner where there's only like maybe one or two voices coming at me. But beyond that, there's really no other specific triggers for me. It's just sometimes I get anxious, or my anxiety level really rises, and I just feel like I need to watch myself and watch my own emotions a lot more to make sure that I am thinking level-headed, that I have control of myself, and that whatever I'm feeling or thinking isn't just inside my head, if that makes sense. Especially as a dad, I do have mood swings, and I do have periods where I need to have control of my emotions really well, so that I don't, yell at my own son
Sure.
unduly.
Right.
That's always something you want to try to avoid.
So last question, this one's a two-parter. If you could tell a veteran who's suffering with the mental health challenge one thing, what would it be? And in addition to that, what would you tell someone who cares about that veteran?
I tell this to the people who haven't got a grasp on their own mental challenges yet, because everybody else who does have a grasp knows how to control it. But those who don't, it gets better over time. You need to talk to people, and you need to put into context your own experiences. You know, you can't push them away or shove them away or try to pretend like it didn't happen or it doesn't really matter. What you experienced and what you saw, it did happen, and it does matter. And you need to, if you can't get control of it, you need to talk to someone who can help you get control of it. And if you're caring for a veteran, or if you have a vet in your life that you care about who is struggling, just be there for them. Talk to them. Maybe even not talk to them. If they like to just sit there and watch TV and they're having a really tough time, sit there and watch TV with them. You know, try and make something nice for them. You know, just be a constant positive show of compassion for them.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Dr. Joseph, for joining me today. Best of luck to you both.
Thanks.
Welcome, good to be here.
The Oakland Vet Center provides counseling for veterans and their families. The center is located at 1504 Franklin Street, Suite 200 in Oakland. Services are available by appointment or as drop-in. To learn more, call 510-763-3904. The National Center for PTSD has a comprehensive website that includes useful and current information for today's veterans and their families. A complete database of research articles is available on their pilots database. Learn more at ptsd.va.gov. After Deployment is an online resource supporting service members, veterans, and their families with common post-deployment concerns. The website provides self-care solutions targeting post-traumatic stress, depression, anger, sleep, relationship concerns, and other mental health challenges. Learn more at afterdeployment.org. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.